The Dakota prairie stretched out like a giant, sun-baked blanket. Tall grasses swayed in the wind, whispering secrets only the land knew. Here, miles from anywhere that most folks would call civilized, stood a small but sturdy cabin. Smoke curled from its chimney, a testament to the life within. This was Adelaide Thorne's home. Adelaide wasn't like the other women back in her old community. They valued gossip and fancy dresses, whispered behind cupped hands, and dreamed of finding a husband to take care of them. Adelaide, however, valued hard work, the feel of the earth beneath her fingernails, and the quiet strength that came from providing for herself. The reason she was alone on the prairie was a story whispered in hushed tones back in town. Some said she was too headstrong, others that she was unnatural. The truth was simpler, though no less painful. Adelaide had stood up for what she believed was right, even when it meant standing against the powerful men in her community. When they tried to force a young Lakota girl into a marriage she didn't want, Adelaide intervened. She helped the girl escape, facing the wrath of the townsfolk and the bitter judgment of her own family. The breaking point came when her own father, a man she had always respected, turned his back on her. "You're no daughter of mine," he'd said, his voice cold and hard. So Adelaide left. She packed what little she had, saddled her mare, Betsy, and rode west, seeking a place where she could live according to her own conscience. Life on the prairie was hard. Adelaide learned to hunt, to build, to mend fences, and to survive the harsh winters. She planted a small garden, raising vegetables and herbs. She traded with the occasional traveling merchant, bartering eggs, and knitted goods for supplies she couldn't produce herself. The solitude was often deafening, but Adelaide found a strange sort of peace in it. She was free. Her days were filled with the rhythm of survival, chopping wood, tending to her animals, and scanning the horizon. She knew the dangers of the prairie, the unpredictable weather, the occasional mountain lion, and the ever-present threat of conflict with settlers encroaching on Lakota land. But Adelaide was not easily scared. She had faced worse than wild animals and harsh weather. She had faced the scorn of her community and the rejection of her family. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Adelaide sat on her porch, sipping a cup of herbal tea. The wind carried the scent of sage and the distant howl of a coyote. She was alone, but she wasn't lonely. She had the prairie, her independence, and the quiet strength that had carried her through so much. Little did she know that tomorrow, her solitary life would be forever changed. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Adelaide rose with the sun, her movements practiced and efficient. After a quick breakfast of cornbread and coffee, she saddled Betsy and set off to check her trapline. She relied on trapping small animals for extra income and to keep predators away from her chickens. As she rode along a narrow trail, the wind rustled through the cottonwood trees, their leaves shimmering like silver. Suddenly, Betsy stopped, her ears twitching nervously. Adelaide followed her gaze and saw something lying in the tall grass. It was a man. He was young, maybe in his early 20s, and dressed in the worn leather clothing of a Lakota warrior. His face was streaked with dirt and blood, and a deep gash ran across his shoulder. He was unconscious. Adelaide dismounted cautiously, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle she carried across her saddle. She approached the man slowly, her senses on high alert. She knew the risks. Helping a Lakota warrior, especially one wounded, could bring trouble. The settlers were already suspicious of her, and harboring a Native American would only confirm their prejudices. But as she looked at his face, she saw not a threat, but a young man in desperate need of help. His breathing was shallow, and his skin was clammy. He wouldn't last long out here in the sun. A conflict raged within Adelaide. She could leave him, turn Betsy around, and ride back to her cabin. Pretend she hadn't seen anything. It would be the safe thing to do. But she couldn't. She couldn't turn her back on someone in need, not after what she had been through herself. With a sigh, she made her decision. She unloaded her rifle and carefully laid it on the ground. Then, she knelt beside the wounded warrior and gently checked his pulse. It It was weak, but steady. She needed to get him back to her cabin, and fast. The task of getting him on a Betsy's back was difficult, but Adelaide managed it with surprising strength. She tied him securely to the saddle, making sure he wouldn't fall. Then, she led Betsy slowly back towards her cabin, her heart pounding in her chest. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made her jump. She imagined eyes watching her from the trees, judging her, waiting for her to make a mistake. She knew that what she was doing was dangerous, but she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Back at the cabin, Adelaide carefully helped the warrior down from Betsy. She dragged him inside and laid him on her bed, the only soft place in the entire house. She quickly cleaned his wound with warm water and herbs, stitching it closed with practiced hands. As she worked, she couldn't help but wonder who he was and what had happened to him. Why was he alone out here, so far from his people? And what would she do once he woke up? For now, all she could do was tend to his wounds and hope for the best. She knew that by helping him, she was putting herself in danger. But she also knew that she had done the right thing. And in the end, that was all that mattered. She had followed her conscience, just as she had done when she left her community. And she wouldn't have it any other way. The prairie, silent and vast, held its breath, waiting to see what the dawn would bring. For 2 days, Chayton remained unconscious. Adelaide tended to him diligently, changing his bandages, feeding him broth, and keeping a watchful eye on his fever. She spoke to him softly, telling him stories of the prairie, of her life, of her hopes and dreams. She didn't know if he could hear her, but it comforted her to talk, to break the silence of the cabin. On the 3rd day, Chayton finally stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked around the room, confused and disoriented. He tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through his shoulder, and he groaned. "Easy," Adelaide said, gently pushing him back down. "You've been badly hurt. You need a rest." Chayton stared at her, his eyes dark and intense. He didn't speak, but Adelaide could see the questions swirling in his mind. Who was she? Where was he? And why was she helping him? "My name is Adelaide," she said, meeting his gaze. "I found you wounded on the prairie. I brought you back here to help you." Chayton remained silent for a moment, studying her face. Then he spoke, his voice raspy and weak. "Why?" Adelaide shrugged. "Because it was the right thing to do. You needed help." Chayton frowned. "You are not Lakota." "No, Adelaide replied. I'm not. But that doesn't mean I can't help someone in need." A flicker of understanding crossed Chayton's face. He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his strength. When he opened them again, he looked at Adelaide with a newfound respect. "My name is Chayton," he said. "I am grateful." Adelaide smiled. "You don't need to be grateful. Just rest and get better." As Chayton recovered, Adelaide learned more about him and his people. He told her stories of the Lakota way of life, of their respect for the land, of their struggles to protect their territory from the encroaching settlers. Adelaide, in turn, shared her own story, explaining why she had left her community and how she had come to live on the prairie. A bond began to form between them, an unlikely friendship built on mutual respect and understanding. They were from different worlds, with different cultures and different beliefs, but they found common ground in their shared humanity. But their newfound peace was soon to be threatened. One day, as Adelaide and Chayton were working in the garden, they saw a group of riders approaching the cabin. They were settlers, armed and looking angry. And leading them was a man Adelaide recognized with a sinking feeling. Her uncle, Colonel Blackwood. Well, Blackwood said, dismounting his horse and approaching Adelaide. "What have we here? It seems my wayward niece has been harboring a savage." Adelaide stood her ground, her eyes blazing with defiance. "He's a guest in my home, uncle, and I won't let you harm him." Blackwood laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Don't be a fool, Adelaide. This land belongs to us now, and anyone who stands in our way will be dealt with." The lines had been drawn. The conflict was inevitable. Adelaide knew that she and Chayton were outnumbered and outgunned, but she also knew that she wouldn't back down. She would defend her home and her friend, even if it meant facing her own family and risking everything. The storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising a clash that would test Adelaide's courage and determine the fate of her little corner of the prairie. "You have no right to this land, Silas," Adelaide stated, her voice firm despite the tremor of fear she felt. Silas Blackwood, a man hardened by greed and ambition, was not easily swayed. "Right," he scoffed, spitting on the ground near her feet. "I have the right of conquest, Adelaide, the right of progress. This land is wasted in your hands, and in the hands of those savages. We will make it productive. We will build a town, bring civilization." Civilization? Chayton spoke for the first time since Blackwood's arrival, his English halting but clear. "You call this civilization? Stealing land, killing those who defend it." Blackwood glared at Chayton. "You stay out of this, Redskin. This is between me and my niece." He turned back to Adelaide, his eyes narrowed. "I'm giving you one chance, Adelaide. Leave, pack your things and go. I'll even give you a few dollars to get you started somewhere else." Adelaide shook her head. "This is my home, Silas. I built it with my own 2 hands. I won't be driven out by you or anyone else." Blackwood sighed dramatically. "I was hoping it wouldn't come to this, but you leave me no choice." He gestured to his men, who began to spread out, surrounding the cabin. "Take them." Chayton moved swiftly, placing himself between Adelaide and the settlers. He drew a knife from his belt, its blade gleaming in the sunlight. Blackwood's men hesitated, their bravado faltering in the face of Chayton's fierce expression. Adelaide grabbed her rifle from inside the cabin, loading it quickly and efficiently. She stood beside Chayton, her eyes fixed on Blackwood. "I won't let you take my home, Silas. I'm prepared to defend it." A tense standoff ensued. The settlers, armed with rifles and shotguns, faced Adelaide and Chayton, who stood their ground with courage and determination. The air crackled with unspoken threats, the silence broken only by the rustling of the wind and the nervous shuffling of horses. Blackwood, realizing that Adelaide wouldn't be easily intimidated, changed his tactics. "All right, Adelaide," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "I see you're serious. I'm willing to negotiate." Adelaide raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Negotiate? After threatening me and my friend?" "I'm a reasonable man, Adelaide," Blackwood said, spreading his hands in a gesture of peace. "All I want is what's best for everyone. Maybe we can find a way to share this land, a way for us all to prosper." Adelaide knew that Blackwood was lying. He didn't want to share. He wanted to take everything for himself. But she also knew that she and Chayton couldn't hold off the settlers indefinitely. They needed time to find help, time to prepare. "All right, Silas," Adelaide said, her voice cautious. "I'm willing to talk, but on my terms. You and your men will leave my property. We'll meet tomorrow at the creek alone, just you and me." Blackwood hesitated, considering her offer. He didn't like the idea of being alone with Adelaide, but he also knew that he couldn't afford to push her too far. "All right, Adelaide," he said finally, "tomorrow at the creek. But don't try anything foolish." Blackwood and his men rode away, leaving Adelaide and Chayton alone once more. But the peace was shattered, the threat of violence hanging heavy in the air. Adelaide knew that she had bought herself some time, but the battle was far from over. She had to find a way to protect her home and her friend, even if it meant making a dangerous alliance. The sun set, casting long shadows across the prairie, a silent warning of the darkness to come. As soon as Blackwood and his men were out of sight, Adelaide turned to Chayton. "We need help," she said, her voice urgent. "We can't face them alone." Chayton nodded. "I know a Lakota village not far from here. I can go and ask for their assistance." Adelaide hesitated. "It's dangerous. What if Blackwood's men see you?" "I will be careful," Chayton assured her. "I know the land well. They won't see me." Adelaide knew that Chayton was right. He was their only hope. "All right," she said, "but be careful and hurry back." Chayton nodded and disappeared into the tall grass, moving with a grace and stealth that impressed Adelaide. She watched him go, her heart pounding her chest, wondering if she would ever see him again. Left alone, Adelaide set about preparing for Blackwood's return. She boarded up the windows of the cabin, reinforcing the door with heavy planks of wood. She gathered all the ammunition she could find, cleaning and loading her rifle and her pistol. She knew that she wasn't a match for Blackwood and his men, but she was determined to make them pay for every inch of her land. Meanwhile, Chayton traveled swiftly through the prairie, his senses alert for any sign of danger. He knew that Blackwood's men were likely patrolling the area, searching for him. He stuck to the shadows, moving through the tall grass like a ghost. After several hours of travel, he reached the Lakota village. It was a small community of teepees nestled in a sheltered valley near a clear running stream. The villagers were wary of him at first, but when he explained his situation and told them about Adelaide and her kindness, they listened with growing interest. Chayton spoke passionately about Adelaide, about her courage and her compassion, about her willingness to help him despite the risks. He told them how she had nursed him back to health, how she had shared her food and her home with him. He argued that she was a friend to the Lakota people and that they had a duty to help her in her time of need. The village chief, a wise old man named Tatanka, listened intently to Chayton's words. He knew of the encroaching settlers and their greed for land. He also knew that the Lakota people were losing their territory and their way of life. He saw in Adelaide's struggle a symbol of their own fight for survival. After a long deliberation, Tatanka made his decision. He would help Adelaide. He gathered his warriors, preparing them for battle. He knew that fighting the settlers would be dangerous, but he also knew that it was the right thing to do. They couldn't stand by and watch as the settlers stole their land and destroyed their way of life. As the sun began to set, Chayton and the Lakota warriors set off towards Adelaide's cabin, their hearts filled with determination. They knew that they were facing a formidable enemy, but they were prepared to fight for their land, for their freedom, and for their friend, Adelaide Thorne. The prairie wind carried their silent promise, a vow of loyalty and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. The alliance was forged, a bridge between two worlds standing together against a common threat. The hours crawled by, each one heavier than the last. Adelaide worked tirelessly, her movements fueled by adrenaline and a fierce determination. She moved furniture to block the windows, creating makeshift barricades. She dug trenches around the cabin, hoping to slow down the settlers' advance. She even set up a few simple traps, using sharpened sticks and rope to create obstacles in their path. Despite her efforts, a gnawing fear crept into her heart. She knew that she was facing overwhelming odds. Blackwood had more men, more guns, and more resources. But Adelaide refused to give in to despair. She had come too far, fought too hard, to surrender now. This was her home, her life, and she would defend it to the very end. As darkness fell, Adelaide lit a single lantern, casting a warm glow inside the cabin. She sat by the window, her rifle resting across her lap, her eyes scanning the horizon. The prairie was silent, but Adelaide could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of the coming storm. She thought about her life, about the choices she had made, about the sacrifices she had endured. She thought about her family, about the pain of their rejection. She wondered if she had made the right decision, leaving everything behind to live alone on the prairie. But as she looked around her cabin, at the simple but sturdy walls, at the garden she had planted with her own hands, she knew that she had. She had found peace and independence here, a sense of belonging that she had never felt before, and she wouldn't let anyone take that away from her. Suddenly, she heard a sound in the distance, the faint but unmistakable sound of horses' hooves. She tensed, her grip tightening on her rifle. They were coming. Adelaide took a deep breath, steeling herself for the battle ahead. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the words of her grandmother. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. She opened her eyes, her gaze resolute. She was afraid, but she wouldn't let fear control her. She would face Blackwood and his men with courage and determination, fighting for her home, for her freedom, and for her friend, Chayton. Just as the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, Adelaide saw them. Blackwood and his men, riding towards the cabin, their faces grim and determined. She watched them approach, her heart pounding in her chest, but her hand steady on the trigger of her rifle. She was ready. A few minutes later, she heard another sound, a different sound, the sound of Lakota war cries echoing across the prairie. She smiled, a glimmer of hope flickering in her eyes. Chayton had returned. She wasn't alone. The stage was set. The battle was about to begin. Adelaide Thorne, the outcast, the independent woman, stood ready to defend her home, her friend, and her way of life, with courage and determination that surprised even herself. The fate of the prairie hung in the balance, resting on the shoulders of an unlikely alliance and the unwavering spirit of a woman who refused to be broken. Blackwood's men charged forward, firing their rifles as they advanced. Bullets whizzed past Adelaide's head, splintering the wood of the cabin walls. She ducked behind a barricade, returning fire with steady aim. The Lakota warriors, led by Chayton, emerged from the tall grass, their war cries echoing across the prairie. They attacked the settlers from the flank, catching them by surprise. A fierce battle erupted, the air filled with the sounds of gunfire, shouts, and the thunder of horses' hooves. Adelaide fought with a courage and skill that surprised even herself. She moved quickly and efficiently, reloading her rifle, taking aim, and firing with deadly accuracy. She knew that she had to be strong, not just for herself, but for Chayton and the Lakota warriors who were risking their lives to help her. Blackwood, watching the battle unfold, grew increasingly frustrated. He had expected an easy victory, but Adelaide and her allies were putting up a fierce resistance. He urged his men forward, shouting orders and threats, but they were met with a wall of gunfire and the relentless attacks of the Lakota warriors. One of Blackwood's men managed to break through the Lakota lines and charged towards the cabin, firing his rifle. Adelaide saw him coming and quickly took aim. She fired, and the settler fell to the ground, his rifle clattering beside him. Inspired by Adelaide's bravery, the Lakota warriors fought with renewed vigor. They charged forward, driving the settlers back, forcing them to take cover behind rocks and trees. The battle raged on, the outcome uncertain. Adelaide knew that they couldn't hold out forever. Blackwood had more men, and they would eventually overwhelm them. They needed a plan, a way to turn the tide of the battle. She looked around, assessing the situation. She noticed that Blackwood was directing his men from behind a large rock, his attention focused on the Lakota warriors. She saw an opportunity. Adelaide grabbed a handful of gunpowder and a lit torch. She crept out of the cabin, moving stealthily through the tall grass, keeping low to the ground. She approached Blackwood's position, her heart pounding in her chest. When she was close enough, she stood up and threw the gunpowder towards a rock. The gunpowder exploded, sending a cloud of smoke and debris into the air. Blackwood and his men were caught off guard, disoriented and confused. Adelaide seized the opportunity. She charged forward, firing her pistol, taking down several of Blackwood's men. The Lakota warriors, seeing her bravery, followed her lead, attacking with renewed ferocity. The settlers, demoralized and disorganized, began to retreat. Blackwood, realizing that he was losing the battle, ordered his men to fall back. The battle was over. Adelaide and the Lakota warriors had won. But the victory came at a cost. Many had been wounded, and some had been killed. The prairie was littered with bodies and the wreckage of battle. The silence that followed was heavy with grief and loss. The dust settled on a field that had been transformed in a few short hours from a peaceful home into a war zone. The taste of victory was bitter. The immediate aftermath of the battle was a blur of tending to the wounded and mourning the dead. Adelaide moved among the injured, offering what comfort she could, her heart heavy with sorrow. She saw young Lakota warriors, barely more than boys, lying lifeless on the ground, their dreams forever extinguished. She saw settlers, men she had known for years, their faces contorted in pain and regret. The senselessness of the violence weighed heavily on her. One moment particularly tested her resolve. As she was bandaging a wounded Lakota warrior, she saw Blackwood approaching, his face grim and determined. He was unarmed, but his eyes burned with anger. "This is all your fault, Adelaide," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You brought this on yourself. You could have just left, but you had to be stubborn." Adelaide looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and pity. "I was defending my home, Silas," she said. "Something you seem incapable of understanding." Blackwood scoffed. "Home? This isn't your home. You don't belong here. You never did." Adelaide stood up, facing him squarely. "This is my home now," she said, her voice firm, "and I'll do whatever it takes to protect it." Blackwood lunged at her, grabbing her by the throat. Adelaide gasped for air, struggling to break free. The wounded Lakota warrior tried to intervene, but Blackwood shoved him aside. Just as Blackwood was about to choke the life out of Adelaide, Chayton appeared, knocking Blackwood to the ground with a swift kick. He stood over Blackwood, his knife drawn, his eyes blazing with fury. "Don't," Adelaide said, her voice hoarse. "Don't kill him." Chayton hesitated, his hand trembling. He looked at Adelaide, his eyes filled with confusion. "He tried to kill you," he said. "I know," Adelaide said, "but killing him won't solve anything. It will only create more hatred, more violence." Chayton slowly lowered his knife, his anger gradually subsiding. He helped Adelaide to her feet, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked. Adelaide nodded, her hand touching her throat. "I'm fine," she said. "Thank you." That moment, facing Blackwood's hatred and Chayton's willingness to defend her, crystallized Adelaide's commitment. She realized that she wasn't just fighting for her land. She was fighting for a future where people of different cultures could live together in peace and harmony. She had to find a way to end the cycle of violence, to build a bridge between the settlers and the Lakota people. It was a daunting task, but she was determined to try. Later that day, after the wounded had been cared for and the dead had been buried, Adelaide approached Blackwood. He was sitting alone, staring into the distance, his face etched with defeat. "Silas," Adelaide said, her voice gentle, "we can't go on like this. There has to be a better way." Blackwood looked at her, his eyes filled with despair. "There is no better way, Adelaide," he said. "This is the way it's always been. The strong take what they want, and the weak suffer." "That doesn't have to be true," Adelaide said. "We can choose a different path. We can learn to live together, to respect each other, to share this land." Blackwood shook his head. "It's too late for that, Adelaide," he said. "Too much has happened. Too much blood has been shed." "It's never too late," Adelaide said, "as long as we're willing to try." The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the prairie. Adelaide stood before Blackwood, her hand outstretched, offering him a chance at peace. The fate of the prairie and the future of its people hung in the balance, waiting to see if Blackwood would accept her offer. The path to peace would be difficult, but she hoped that he would take the first step with her. Blackwood stared at Adelaide's outstretched hand, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He had come to take her land, to drive her and the Lakota people out. He had been consumed by greed and hatred. But now, looking at Adelaide's unwavering gaze, he began to question his own motives. He saw the pain in her eyes, the sorrow for the lives lost. He saw the determination in her stance, the commitment to peace. He realized that she was offering him something more valuable than land or wealth, a chance to break free from the cycle of violence, to build a better future for his people. Slowly, hesitantly, Blackwood reached out and took Adelaide's hand. His grip was weak, but it was a start. "All right, Adelaide," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm willing to try." A wave of relief washed over Adelaide. She squeezed Blackwood's hand, her heart filled with hope. "Thank you, Silas," she said. "I know it won't be easy, but we can do this together." The next few days were filled with difficult conversations and tense negotiations. Adelaide, Blackwood, and Chief Tatanka met to discuss the terms of a peace agreement. They argued and debated, but they never lost sight of their shared goal, to find a way for the settlers and the Lakota people to live together in peace. Adelaide played a crucial role in the negotiations, acting as a bridge between the two cultures. She understood the settlers' desire for land and resources, but she also respected the Lakota people's connection to their ancestral lands. She worked tirelessly to find a compromise that would satisfy both sides. One of the most contentious issues was the question of land ownership. The settlers wanted to claim all the land for themselves, while the Lakota people refused to cede any of their territory. Adelaide proposed a solution. The land would be divided into two zones, one for the settlers and one for the Lakota people. Both zones would be managed sustainably, with respect for the environment and the needs of future generations. Another key issue was the question of justice. The settlers wanted to punish the Lakota warriors for their resistance, while the Lakota people demanded compensation for the injustices they had suffered. Adelaide proposed a system of restorative justice, where both sides would work together to heal the wounds of the past and build a more equitable future. Slowly but surely, the negotiations began to yield results. The settlers agreed to respect the Lakota people's right to their land and resources. The Lakota people agreed to cooperate with the settlers in managing the land sustainably. Both sides agreed to participate in the system of restorative justice. As the peace agreement began to take shape, a sense of hope spread across the prairie. The settlers and the Lakota people began to interact with each other, trading goods, sharing stories, and learning about each other's cultures. They realized that they had more in common than they thought. The turning point came when Blackwood publicly apologized for his past actions, acknowledging the injustices that the settlers had inflicted on the Lakota people. His apology was met with a mixture of skepticism and relief. But it was a start. It was a sign that the settlers were finally willing to acknowledge their past mistakes and commit to a better future. With that admission, a path toward lasting peace was paved. The battle had tested Adelaide's resolve and led her to a place where she could effect true change. The final peace agreement, etched onto a piece of tanned hide and signed with both ink and symbolic Lakota markings, was a testament to Adelaide's unwavering commitment and the willingness of both sides to compromise. First and foremost, Adelaide's claim to her land was formally recognized and protected. The settlers acknowledged her right to the property she had worked so hard to build and maintain, ensuring her security and independence. This recognition was a crucial victory, not just for Adelaide, but for all those who believed in the power of individual perseverance and the right to live free from oppression. The agreement also established clear boundaries between the settlers' territory and the Lakota people's ancestral lands. The settlers pledged to respect these boundaries and to refrain from further encroachment. The Lakota people, in turn, agreed to allow settlers to travel through their land for trade and commerce, fostering a spirit of cooperation and mutual benefit. Perhaps the most innovative aspect of the peace agreement was the establishment of a joint council, composed of representatives from both the settler and Lakota communities. This council was tasked with resolving disputes, managing shared resources, and promoting understanding and cooperation between the two groups. The council would meet regularly, providing a forum for open dialogue and collaborative decision-making. The agreement also addressed the issue of justice, establishing a system of restorative justice that emphasized healing and reconciliation rather than punishment. Both settlers and Lakota people who had committed crimes would be held accountable, but their sentences would focus on repairing the harm they had caused and reintegrating them into the community. This system reflected a belief in the inherent goodness of human nature and the potential for redemption. Furthermore, the agreement included provisions for education and cultural exchange. Settler children would learn about Lakota history and culture, and Lakota children would learn about the settlers' way of life. This exchange of knowledge and perspectives would help to break down stereotypes and prejudices, fostering a deeper understanding and appreciation for each other's traditions. Finally, the peace agreement included a commitment to environmental sustainability. Both settlers and Lakota people agreed to manage the land responsibly, protecting its natural resources for future generations. They pledged to conserve water, preserve forests, and protect wildlife, recognizing that their survival depended on the health of the prairie. The signing of the peace agreement was a momentous occasion, celebrated by both settlers and Lakota people. It was a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and compromise. It was a sign that even in the midst of conflict and division, hope for a better future could prevail. Adelaide Thorne, the woman who had been ostracized by her community, had become a beacon of hope for the entire prairie, demonstrating that even the most unlikely individuals could make a difference in the world. The agreement stood as a symbol of what could be achieved when people chose understanding over hatred. In the years that followed the peace agreement, Adelaide thrived. She embraced her unique position as a bridge between two worlds, becoming a respected figure in both the settler and Lakota communities. She continued to live in her cabin on the prairie, but her life was no longer solitary. She welcomed visitors from both communities, sharing stories, meals, and laughter. Her cabin became a haven for those seeking understanding and connection. Adelaide also became a member of the Joint Council, where she played a vital role in resolving disputes and promoting cooperation. Her wisdom and compassion earned her the respect of all who served on the council, and she became known as a fair and impartial mediator. Chayton remained a close friend and ally, often working alongside Adelaide to bridge cultural gaps and foster understanding. He taught her the Lakota language and customs, and she shared with him her knowledge of the settlers' ways. Together, they became powerful advocates for peace and harmony. Adelaide's relationship with her family also began to heal. Her father, witnessing the positive changes she had brought to the prairie, realized that he had been wrong to reject her. He traveled to her cabin to apologize, and Adelaide welcomed him with open arms. They rebuilt their relationship, and Adelaide once again felt a sense of belonging and connection to her family. Over time, the prairie transformed into a place of vibrant diversity and cultural exchange. Settler children played alongside Lakota children, learning from each other and forging lasting friendships. Settlers and Lakota people worked together to build schools, hospitals, and other community institutions. They celebrated each other's holidays and festivals, sharing their traditions and customs. Adelaide watched with pride as the prairie blossomed into a place of peace and harmony. She had come to the prairie seeking solitude and independence, but she had found something much more valuable, a sense of purpose and connection. She had discovered that her true calling was to be a bridge between two worlds, to help people understand and respect each other, to build a better future for all. As the sun set each evening, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Adelaide sat on her porch, sipping a cup of herbal tea, her heart filled with gratitude. She was no longer an outcast, but a respected leader, a beloved friend, and a cherished member of both the settler and Lakota communities. She had found her place in the world, not by choosing one culture over the other, but by embracing both. The prairie wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying a message of hope and harmony. Adelaide listened, smiling, knowing that her journey had just begun. She looked forward to a future where all people could live together in peace and understanding, where differences were celebrated, and where compassion and kindness prevailed. The prairie, once a symbol of division and conflict, had become a testament to the power of the human spirit and the enduring hope for a shared future. The strength that allowed her to survive alone now allowed her to bring people together. And in the end, that was her greatest accomplishment.